Many years ago, a man named Jonah lived in the region of Galilee. One day, the God who created the heavens and the earth spoke to him and commanded Jonah to go on a journey. "Jonah, son of Amittai," God said, "you must go among the wicked people of Nineveh and cry out against the evil they do. And if they do not turn from their sinful ways, I will be forced to destroy their great and proud city." Jonah became filled with fear. God was commanding him, a Hebrew, to go among the citizens of Nineveh, the mighty capital of the Assyrians, and tell them that his God intends to destroy them for their wickedness. Surely they would never listen to him. Jonah paced back and forth. "How can I escape God's wrath if I don't go?" he thought. "My only chance is to get as far from God as possible, to the very end of the earth if need be." So Jonah fled under the cover of darkness to the port city of Joppa. But as he journeyed from his homeland, he felt the stars in the heavens like 1,000,000 fiery eyes watching him steal across the countryside. All night he journeyed, and by the next morning, Jonah had reached the bustling port on the Mediterranean Sea. He saw people from every part of the world among the sailors and merchants who crowded the dock. And though Jonah had broken no law of man, he felt like a fugitive. As he walked, he studied the different signs that told of each ship's destination. Then, Jonah spotted a means of escape. A Phoenician sailing ship that was headed for Tarshish at the farthest end of the Great Sea. "I must board that ship," thought Jonah to himself as he hurried through the crowd. Jonah stepped up to the table where the ship's captain was collecting fees. "How much is a passage to Tarshish?" he asked. Captain looked up and studied Jonah's face. "This man did not sleep last night," thought the captain, "and his wild-eyed gaze tells me someone is after him. It'll be too much trouble to take along." But before the captain could refuse him, Jonah dropped his coin-laden purse on the table, and the captain's eyes brightened. "20 gold pieces," said the captain, quoting a fee twice the normal rate. Nearby, several crew members took notice of Jonah's willingness to pay such a high price. Jonah felt them studying him, but he looked at no one and spoke to no one. Quickly, he found himself a berth far below the ship's deck and tried to sleep. Yet the burden of his disobedience pressed down on him, and the small enclosed space seemed like a tomb. But once the ship pulled out of the harbor, Jonah started to feel better. "At last, I'm free of God," he thought, as he drifted off to sleep. But as he lay alone below deck, dark clouds were forming in the western sky. And by day's end, after a starless night had fallen and the ship was far from land, the wind began to blow and great whitecaps crested on the sea. "A squall is upon us!" yelled the watchman to the captain. Lightning flashed and thunder echoed across the heavens. Great waves began crashing on the deck, and the ship started to take on water. The frightened crewmen called out to their gods for help. Frantically, the crew began throwing cargo overboard in a desperate attempt to keep the boat from sinking. The captain looked around the deck for his nervous passenger, but did not see him. Everyone's help was needed, so he ran below to find Jonah. "Wake up! It's time to say your prayers, for a fierce storm has come up and is threatening to sink us." Instantly, Jonah was awake. His greatest fear had come to pass. God had found him. Jonah and the captain raced up to the deck. "This is like no weather I've seen before," cried the captain. "No matter how I steer, the wind changes and blows us back. I think heaven is against us because someone on this ship has angered God. I must gather the men together." So as the storm raged about them, the men gathered and drew straws, certain whoever picked the short straw would be the source of their troubles. One by one, each selected a shoot from the captain's hand and sighed with relief when he saw it was not the short one. Jonah nervously rubbed his fingers together as he waited for his turn. As he picked his straw, the sailor's eyes widened with anger. Jonah held the short straw. Immediately, they bombarded him with angry questions. "Who are you? Where do you come from? Why is heaven angry with you? What have you done?" And for a moment, Jonah just stared at the short straw he held in his hand. "It is my fault," he mumbled. "Quiet!" yelled the captain, silencing the others. "Explain what you mean, Jonah." Jonah looked up at the men and said, "I am a Hebrew and a believer in the one God of heaven and earth." Then the whole story poured out of Jonah. "Your only chance to save yourselves and quiet the raging sea is to throw me overboard," cried Jonah. But the sailors were reluctant to cast him into the dark waters, so they tried instead to row for shore. They rowed and rowed with all their might, but it was no use. The gale winds buffeted the ship and only pushed it farther out to sea. Finally, the captain looked up to the heavens and hollered into the raging storm, "God of Jonah, do not blame us for this man's death. We give him to you. Only spare us." And with that, the ship's crew lifted Jonah above their heads and cast him into the waves. Jonah hit the swirling water and was dragged down. But at that very instant, God prepared a great whale, as big as a sailing ship, to swallow him. Jonah tried to scream, but he could make no sound. He was swept into the whale's gaping maw and down, down into complete darkness. Above, the skies cleared and the water calmed immediately. But below, the great whale dove to the bottom of the ocean with Jonah in its belly. He was now totally alone, engulfed in darkness and silence. God had rescued him from drowning, but the price of his salvation had been imprisonment in a floating tomb. But on the third day, Jonah's heart lifted toward heaven. "I cry to you, Lord, out of the depths of my suffering, and you hear me. Out of the belly of hell I pray, and you listen. I was cast into the sea, and the water was all around me, and the waves crashed over me, and I thought, Now I am really out of God's sight, but still I look to you, God. And when the water was about to swallow my very soul and bring me to a watery grave at the bottom of the earth, you heard my cry and rescued me. Thank you for my life. Have mercy on me, Lord. I was wrong and will obey your command to go to Nineveh, for the chance to walk on the earth, breathe fresh air, and see the sun again. Please, let me be your messenger. Suddenly there was a jolt. Jonah panicked, fearing he was about to be cast into the sea to drown, but just as suddenly, the whale spit out Jonah, and the waves carried him onto the shore. Thank you, Lord, he cried. Then he hung his head and wept, for he realized that God had always been with him, even at the bottom of the sea. The weary Jonah lay exhausted on the sand when God spoke to him again. Arise, Jonah. Now go to the city of Nineveh. This time Jonah obeyed God immediately and set out on the journey to Nineveh. The sun's heat and the driving wind went unnoticed by Jonah. His only thoughts and feelings were that he must obey God's command. His trip passed quickly, and in time, Jonah reached the massive gates of Nineveh. Without hesitating, he entered, and what he saw there sickened him. Evil of every kind imaginable coursed through the city streets. But Jonah knew that God was with him, and it gave him strength. He moved quickly through the mobs of people and went straight to the main square of the city. There, Jonah found a spot among the merchants and began delivering the message that God had ordered him to bring. "People of Nineveh," he shouted, "the God of Abraham has commanded me to tell you that he will destroy your city and everything in it at the end of 40 days if you do not humble yourselves and turn from your wicked ways." At first, no one paid any attention to Jonah, but he kept repeating God's message over and over. And little by little, a crowd gathered to listen. A few people yelled at Jonah and told him, "Go back to your own land." But soon they too were touched by the power of God's words. A citizen of Nineveh stepped forward. "The warning Jonah has brought is from the one true God," he said, "and it has moved me to repent of my evil ways and seek God's mercy." In a short time, all the people in the square believed Jonah's message, and they began to fast and pray. So remarkable was the transformation of the people who heard Jonah that word of it spread quickly to the king of Nineveh. "I want to hear his story myself," commanded the king. He dispatched his guards to bring the Hebrew to his palace. And so Jonah was brought into the grand chamber of gold and silver. Jonah stood before the king and told him all the things that had happened from the day God first spoke to him. The king listened to Jonah with great interest, and something made him believe the message Jonah brought and take comfort in his story of a merciful God. And the next morning he issued a royal proclamation to all the people of Nineveh. he decreed, "Men and beasts are to eat nothing. They are to drink no water. From the greatest to the least, all are to put on sackcloth and call on God with all their might. Let everyone renounce his evil behavior and the wicked things he has done. And I, the king, will do the same." It is our only hope that God will have mercy on us. And with that the king rose, took off his crown and golden mantle, and put on a plain robe and sat down in ashes to humble himself. His people were stunned, but then they too followed the king's example. And as they fasted and reflected on the evil in their lives, a change came over them. They asked God for forgiveness. God was moved to compassion, and at the end of 40 days he spared the city, its people, and every creature within its walls. But Jonah, who had been watching the transformation take place, became indignant. He was enraged that he had suffered so much, and now in the end, God had spared the people of Nineveh so easily. Jonah called to God, "This is just what I knew would happen when I was still at home. I wish you had let me die." And God said, "Do you have the right to be so angry?" But Jonah did not answer God. In his anger, he left the city and climbed atop a nearby hill to brood. But as he sat there, God arranged for a castor oil plant to spring up over Jonah that shaded him with its leaves and gourds. It was a sweltering day, but Jonah felt comfortable beneath the shade of the wonderful plant. But by the next morning, God had sent a worm to attack the plant, and it withered. The rising sun beat down on Jonah, and God sent a scorching east wind to dry Jonah's eyes and throat. The heat grew so intense that Jonah was overcome and begged for death, saying, "I might as well die as go on living." God said to Jonah, "Are you right to be angry?" "I have every right to be angry to the point of death," answered Jonah. God spoke to Jonah once more. "Jonah, you say you know me, but you don't. You feel sorry about the death of this vine, but you didn't plant it or help it grow. And it only took a night to grow and another night to wither away. Should I not feel sorry for Nineveh then, in which there are more than 120,000 people? If you had truly known me, you would have known I would forgive the people of Nineveh, and you would have delivered my message the first time I asked you. Yes, I forgave them, just as I have forgiven you many times."